regions of Ukraine that Russia partly occupies and claims as its own since last year. However, Ukrainian troops continue to hold positions on the outskirts. Meanwhile, Russia says that it has evacuated around 300 people from Belgorod over fears of Ukrainian strikes.
Welcome to the broadcast, Lieutenant Colonel Grant.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I'll begin with my first question. And after nearly 2 years of war, both Russia and Ukraine are running out of ammunition. But who do you think has the upper hand right now?
I think, to be fair, Ukraine does. Because Russia has been fighting extremely hard in the last month or so and has made almost no gains whatsoever. Whereas the Ukrainians, even with the smaller numbers that you talked about previously, are still managing to hold on and inflict huge casualties on the Russian side. But this is a very complex situation right at the moment. Is that a whole lot of things, and they're all happening all at the same time. But I don't believe that this is that there is a switch to suddenly that Russia is suddenly better than it was before. Russia is still throwing everything it's got at Ukraine, and Ukraine is still holding. Whatever anybody writes about it, the front line is holding and is holding steadily.
Lieutenant Colonel Grant, Ukrainians have volunteered to fight to defend their country from the beginning of the war. But with mounting losses right now, do you think war fatigue is setting in?
Oh, I think war fatigue is setting in on both sides, but that doesn't actually. But war fatigue doesn't actually reflect it within the country as a whole. Because what people are worried about is not the frontline fighting. What they're worried about is that the organisation of the government is not as efficient as it needs to be to make things happen. And you know, you mentioned that the new law in Parliament. Well, that law should have been a year ago. And this is typical of the Ukrainian government as it is. It talks extremely well, but an awful lot of the things that it needs to do in terms of management and organisational things are not done to the level that they need to be for a country at war. Hence, there are problems. So, but what you see in social media, what you're talking about in social media, is the public beginning to get angry about this and beginning to want to make changes so that the front line is stronger and that the war is better conducted.
Lieutenant Colonel Grant, now, you know, the war has entered and stretched into 2024 now. How do you see the Russia-Ukraine war panning out in the near future?
Well, it's going to go on until one side or the other wins, and Ukraine is extremely. The Ukrainian public are determined that they are not going to lose this war, and as more people are killed in the front line, it's not creating, as you might suggest, that people wanting to give in. It's having the reverse effect. There is an increase in level of stubbornness and annoyance about the whole thing, and a determination to see the war through to the end. So I don't see it finishing in any time soon. It's certainly got another year to run at the moment, unless Russia collapses, because I can assure you Ukraine is not going to collapse.
On that note, Lieutenant Colonel Grant, thank you so much for joining us and giving us all those insights on this. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you very much.
Ukraine saw a major uptick in volunteers willing to fight on the front lines. Now, as a surge of patriotism swept the nation, now 2 years on, with heavy casualties and grinding trench warfare reminiscent of World War I, the Ukrainian military is struggling to fill in its ranks. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that the army may call upon over 500,000 people to battle. This is to match Russia's 600,000 soldiers deployed on the front lines. Ukraine, which currently has roughly 800,000 soldiers among its ranks, has not shared any data, either revealing its deployment strength or the losses incurred. But now people are slowly getting wary of the long grinding war.
Activate any of our capabilities and resources. Human resources first and foremost. My husband has been at war since February 28th, and my son-in-law is at war. I see a very large number of examples of people sacrificing themselves who go to war following the call of the heart.
Zelensky now wants to lower the age of military service from 27 to 25. According to a draft bill in the Ukrainian parliament, harsher penalties have been proposed for those who refuse to fight. Human rights monitors in Ukraine have warned that stricter legislation concerning draft enforcement would only serve to turn Ukrainians away from military service, or worse, mimic Russian authoritarianism.
I am against the military age being higher than 60 and lower than 25 years at a minimum. But since we went through the Second World War, we must understand that if the country is in dire straits, if there is such a state and situation, if it is indeed a crisis, then we must somehow defend our state.
The proposed changes have prompted outcry on social media, with many Ukrainian figures proposing alternatives to tackle the nation's mobilization woes. One ruling party lawmaker suggested exemptions from service in exchange for substantial donations to the military budget.
Harsh as it may sound, in my opinion, it is necessary, because it's really a matter where it seems to me there is no choice. For example, I will turn 18 and I'm still deciding, but I might be drafted. In general, my dream is to become a pilot, so I might become a military pilot most likely. My parents won't allow it for now, but we'll figure it out.
On the battlefront, Ukrainian forces continue to fight the Russian forces. Moscow has recently increased the intensity of its attack on Ukraine. Zelensky said that Russia fired 500 missiles and drones in 5 days. The aim of Russian forces is clear: to inflict maximum damages during the harsh winter. And what could compound the problems for Ukrainian military is the drying up of aid from its Western allies. Kyiv's military warned that Ukraine is running low on vital supplies for its air defense systems. Further aid to Ukraine from the United States hangs in the balance. The Biden administration has released the last tranche of military aid, worth approximately $250 million, that Washington can commit to Kyiv without further congressional approval. Now, for more insights, we are now joined from Moscow by Fred Weir. Now, Fred is a journalist and a political commentator. Fred, let me first up throw a couple of figures at you here. Vladimir Zelensky end of the year news conference on December 19th says the military had proposed mobilizing 450,000 to 500,000 more Ukrainians, but that it was a highly sensitive issue that the military and the government would discuss before deciding whether to send the proposal to the parliament. Now, this is by his own admission there. Now, the Ukrainians have volunteered to fight to defend their country in the past, but with mounting losses and harsher punishments for deserters, as we spoke about just now, do you sense a war fatigue that is setting in?
You had said a year ago that the long-term mathematics of this conflict are all to Russia's advantage. People would deny it or think you're a tiny minority. But now it's dead obvious that's exactly what is taking shape. Russia's massive advantages in population, industry, and I would say its political will, which has been quite resilient, I guess. It certainly all talk of Putin being overthrown or collapsing has been greatly exaggerated. Russia has consolidated and is now on a war footing, both economically and in terms of mobilizing manpower, of which it has a lot to spare. And Ukraine is on the back foot. I don't actually know where this is going. It's clear that the issue of mobilization is incredibly sensitive in both countries. I think we all remember what happened in 2022 when Putin ordered a partial mobilization of 300,000 men. Immediately, hundreds of thousands of young Russians left the country. So in both countries, this is a serious issue the idea of going and probably dying in this horrible war is not popular among young men or men of any age, with the exception of Ukraine at the beginning. And as you pointed out, in the first stage of the war, the most patriotic people stood up for the country's defense. Ukrainians fought with a great deal of determination and grit. But now of course, that's wearing thin, and those who don't want to go have been avoiding it, are now finding themselves under a lot of coercion and force. There are apparently like press gangs in the street rounding up young men and forcing them into military service. This has got to be deeply unpopular and a political problem, a growing one in Ukraine.
Right. Fred, you earlier commented about exaggerated sense of Putin's might. How do you see this war panning out in the near future, especially juxtaposed against what Putin said in his New Year's address, where he very passionately said that, yes, we too want to end the war, but only on our own terms. And Zelensky, in a way, refuting a sense of fatigue and weakness, recently said that Ukraine, unlike any other country, has managed to repel an utter annihilation attempt by Russia by way of missiles and drone attacks in the last few days.
It's not going to end according to anyone's wishes, and we've all been wrong. Let's face it. Analysts of all stripes have been wrong from the beginning of this war about how it's going to go, how it is presently. The one thing I've always stuck to is the mathematics just favor Russia. They just do, even with the support of the West behind Ukraine. This is a very unequal struggle, and as long as Russia maintains its political cohesion, and it clearly is doing so, it's eventually going to prevail. And now we do see the determination of the West, particularly the United States, to keep supporting Ukraine as long as it takes, as much as it takes. Apparently, that doesn't really, that was never credible. We've all been in the room watching Americans fight their own wars for the past several decades, from Vietnam to Afghanistan, and they always cut and run when it gets inconvenient, and they are apparently doing it again. Nobody should be surprised at that, but for Ukraine, I guess, who depended so much on it, it's a terrible shock. But this is winding down, and as Putin said, I guess Russia's going to end it on Russian terms, and those are going to be much, much harsher than they might have been 2 years ago. I'm afraid that there's a growing grim determination that one senses in Moscow. They're clearly preparing some kind of hammer blow, perhaps a fresh invasion from the north of Ukraine in the springtime. And I think there is a desire to end it in Moscow, but increasingly they're confident that it's going to be on their terms.
While you very eloquently just answered part of my next question, let me still ask you this to give our viewers a sense of better perspective. The World Bank earlier estimated that the pre-war average age of the Ukrainian population was between 35 to 49, which is around 26% share of Ukraine's total male population. Now, if I were to talk about Russia, it has its own set of problems, no denying there. And after nearly 2 years of war, both Russia and Ukraine are running out of ammunition. Now, there are no winners in war, we all know that. But given the current situation, Russia or Ukraine, who do you think has the upper hand?
Well, yes, Russia,